Hello, everyone. My name is Marc Friedman. I'm a rising senior, or I'm not. I am a senior. Wow, and I at the Bronx High School of Science. And my project today is the impact of nudge theory on healthy choices, specifically in adolescence. First, let's start off with what nudge theory is. So basically, nudge theory is this idea that that things in your environment are have like a sort of pull on the specific choices you make. And the way that nudge theory does this is through three big things: default bias, social norms, and salience. To start off, default bias is basically kind of, as I said before, it's where you refer to it's kind of like the status quo. The example that I like to use is, for example, when you're leaving a hospital or you want to do this retirement plan, you're automatically opted into something, and as a result, it's easier to stay opted in compared to like opting yourself out. And for that reason, most people actually stay with these plans, stay with these emails, stay with these subscriptions. For social norms, basically a big thing that nudge theory can do is because you're in an environment where some things could be deemed more socially acceptable than others. For example, maybe eating a certain type of food compared to somewhere else. As a result, it kind of like subconsciously dictates your decision to actually go through and eat that original type of food. And then salience is, in my opinion, one of the more powerful ones, is when it makes something obvious to you. For example, if you're walking down the street, me, for example, where I go to school, there's a whole bunch of fast food places, and the third block down, maybe you'll see like this Sweet Green or somewhere healthier. And as a result, most people have time on their hands and they just see all these fast food places. And as a result, they kind of want to go and just eat it because it's there, it's easier. And I think that's like something very powerful about nudge theory. And now I want to, but an interesting thing about nudge theory is that economics itself is considered the study of decision making. However, nudge theory, according to standard economic theory, isn't something that should actually affect how you make your decisions. And it's interesting because standard economic theory operates under this thing called the expected utility hypothesis, which basically states that if you want to do something, like you're going to do something based on like how much utility or like how well you can utilize it. And there's no like outside effect of that. There's no like irrationality in your decisions. Whereas behavioral economics posits the opposite. It posits that there are irrational things that can happen. And as a result, not everything can be accounted for by expected utility. Not everything happens for like your self interest or your self gain. And now that posed the question, kind of why would I why would I want to talk about nudge theory? So, what I found an interesting statistic is for adolescents, one in six children ages from 2 to 19 suffer from being overweight, and one in five suffer from obesity. So there is an epidemic in the United States about it, and there have been plenty of initiatives like cross a, a lot of ages kind of positing what we should do with it. Like, how can we like subconsciously dictate people to eat healthier for their own good? And the interesting thing, though, is that most of these studies, especially the ones that I've compiled, don't really talk about adolescence. So I thought maybe it's interesting. Maybe there's some like hormonal difference for adolescents. Maybe peer pressure is a bigger thing. I want to discover if the same uh, kind of threshold for nudge theory is applicable to that of the average person from like who's over the age of 19. And the three ways of kind of going about this are priming, framing, and social norms. Social norms I mentioned before, so I'll mainly stick to priming and framing. Priming basically refers to kind of like giving a mental association to something. For example, like the color green could remind people of vomit and it could remind other people of money. So there's kind of like it primes you to think a certain thing when you associate that color mentally, and it's different for each person. Framing is kind of like exactly what it sounds like. The way you frame a question in a positive or negative light can kind of infect the outcome. And that kind of brings me to my actual study. So what I wanted to do is I had four tests. Two of these tests were considered the healthy tests, and one of these tests were considered the unhealthy tests. Or not unhealthy, but control tests. And in the healthy tests, there were specific aspects of like healthy things like kind of being associated. For example, there was a question that talked about how much protein is in like a steak. If you run X miles, how many calories do you burn? Kind of prompting you to like think, wow, this is beneficial for me. Whereas the other two tests kind of had normal mathematical problems. And I went around to high schools, so around 75 to 100 high school students, and I ended up conducting my study by giving them tests. I wouldn't tell them what this, I would be very general with the study. I would say it was to determine decision making without trying to really give them the real, what's the word, analogy or the real reason behind the study. And what I did afterwards, after the 10 tests, was after 10 minutes were up for each test, I would give them the option between having strawberries or fruit snacks. And I wanted to record if there was a difference between the two. And what I actually found was that there was a significant difference between the groups. The healthy group, of the everyone in the healthy group, 63.6% of people chose strawberries, so 36.4 that chose fruit snacks. Whereas for the control group, a majority of them chose fruit snacks. And I think this kind of reveals two really interesting things. It shows that one, people who like these nudges had an impact on what I guess I viewed as like the status quo or like their original option, because for a control group, it shows that there's more of a preference towards fruit snacks, which is interesting in of itself because that's kind of hinting at the fact that most people would rather have fruit snacks than strawberries, which in my opinion, I really like the taste of strawberries. So I would have rather had the strawberries, but it was an interesting thing to see. And for further implications about this, I feel like this is really insightful for how to kind of now we know that nudges subconsciously, even the smallest form, have some sort of like benefit in creating healthier choices. Now, obviously, there are negative uses of nudges and they should be regulated. For example, in the 80s, like the ad campaigning for cigarettes was like led to a really big issue with like what the widespread usage of that. Whereas, but at the same time, I feel like with regulation, it's something that can be really helpful. What's also interesting is why so many people picked fruit snacks to begin with. That could have been the beginning that could lead to a very interesting idea of how to actually from its roots cut off this like baseline unhealthy association, because I feel like that's something that could be interesting to go about. And another thing that I personally thought required a little bit more research that would actually be happy to keep on doing after this project is seeing in other states. I only did this in Manhattan schools in New York, and I feel like it'd be interesting to see if different schools had different preferences. For example, schools in more rural areas might have better access to fresher food. So for example, so they might be more likely to pick strawberries. I feel like there's a lot of environmental concerns that go around with that as well. But overall, I was very pleased with the results that I had, and I'm very happy to show you guys what I worked on. So yeah, this is basically what I was talking about before, but thank you so much.
It's really interesting. I love sort of setting the stage of this idea of nudge theory, where you have all these fast food restaurants, and then you have the little sweet green in the distance somewhere. So great way to sort of set the stage. I did have one question. This is that nudge theory I'm pretty familiar with myself, but how might your findings have changed if you chose something very unhealthy, like a bar of chocolate compared to the strawberries? And would this sort of remove the notion of nudging, or is it still sort of in within that concept of nudging? Does that make sense? That question makes
Yeah, I
sense?
know, I understand what you're saying. I So what I think about that, bring up an interesting point. I feel like the biggest reason why I didn't want to do something as overt as like a chocolate versus strawberry is because, to be honest, I wasn't really sure what like the baseline norm would be for, like, as I said before, I was very interested to find that in the control group, it was more likely to be fruit snacks than strawberries. So which kind of shows that already these students had like a, I guess, a bit more of an unhealthier like status quo for something that they wanted. So I feel like something like chocolates might have like, I don't want to say in I don't want to say like maybe invalidating the findings or like maybe skewed it to such a sense that so many people like chocolate that it might seem like a no-brainer. But I think that for the sake of the study, I don't think that it totally overhauls like or goes outside the realms of nudge theory. I just think that it might need to be a little bit more of a stronger nudge and a bit of a like, I think honestly a bit of a like, it's also called sludge theory where you kind of like don't want to like, where you kind of want to like avoid something. So
Mm,
like maybe something like if I mentioned that chocolates were unhealthy or something in a different test, I feel like that would have also helped to change the results. But I do think that overall it does fall into the realms.
sure. Got it. No, that's just trying to sort of understand the different permutations that you could have for this project, or for the research itself. And here's a great question from the audience here. Did you speak with any of the students later and update them about your research? What was their response? Did they think they ate more healthy?
So that is interesting. I did talk to a lot of them afterwards. I had to debrief them a little bit, or like I gave them my email and everything like that. And for some students, I feel like who chose strawberries, it seemed very like it was really the healthy group that reached out to me the most, not really the control group. And what I found was that they I wouldn't say they were very interested in the fact that it was like a decision, a very small change was able to change like their entire decision making process. So I think maybe that kind of, from the way it sounded like, I think they might be starting to take it with a grain of salt. Like if you see, like, for example, a BurgerFi, a McDonald's, like a Chick-fil-A right next to each other, like they might start to think, for example, like maybe there's a reason that those three are next to each other and the healthy thing is like all the way over there. And then like maybe it's a little bit easier to rationalize like, is it worth it, or are they just, do I really want this, or is it just because it's so easy like to get to, do I want it? And I think, which is good, I think kind of making people realize that like there are some subconscious indicators that are making you do certain things like helps you kind of rationalize how to go forward with that.
And sort of my last question here would be, how has this research changed your own habits for eating and sort of recognizing when you're being nudged or not nudged?
So actually, this is something I used to. So I like love Ben and Jerry's, and there aren't a lot of like, there isn't a CVS that near me. So I used to like, if I had like a big like test or something like that afterwards, I would like get a bunch of Ben and Jerry's ice creams to like celebrate. But like I noticed that since I don't normally have ice cream, if I do, I eat the entire like pint. So I started to realize like, okay, maybe I shouldn't be eating the entire pint like a day. And as a result of that, like even with this study in mind, I was kind of thinking I like deleted DoorDash and I told like my parents like, okay, like it's up to you guys. Like if I ask them like please let me, but the thing is, like, because I didn't have DoorDash, I didn't like think about it so often, and I didn't. As a result, like now haven't. I've had a couple tests, and I haven't really had ice cream in like a while, and I think that that actually is like a result of me just not being able to get it so easily.